So today Corsair is dropping their version of the 240Hz OLED format that we've seen a couple times now from LG and Asus. This is the Xeneon 27QHD240 OLED, a monitor name that actually makes sense. It is using the same LG panel that we've seen a couple times already, so this is more or less just closing the loop today to figure out which variant is worth picking up if you're considering one of these monitors. The big headline here is that they're offering a 3-year warranty versus 2 from the other manufacturers to help ease your mind about potential burn-in long term. So hopefully there's no big trade-off to brightness that makes them feel confident offering that. This is priced at $999 US, which makes it spot on with both the Asus PG27AQDM and the LG 27GR95QE-B. Horrible name for a product. The stand here is fully articulating with all the usual adjustments. It's got the same overall height as the Asus, which is 1.25 inches shorter than the max height on the LG. You won't find any lighting effects here, and the only front branding is a small reflective logo at the base of the stand. The only thing really noteworthy here with the stand is that it takes up less forward space on the desk than the other two. This is only 8.25 inches front to back, while the other two exceed 10 inches. Jealous. The legs lay flat to the desk, so you won't be feeding any cables under them. It is VESA mountable, of course, with no hassle. You just pull it off the stock stand. The plastic they use does feel like lesser quality than the other two options, and it fingerprints and shows oil like crazy. The panel assembly itself is very similar as well. It's just got a thin forward panel and then a larger box taking up maybe 60% of the rear. I like that they've gone with the LG style of cable attachment here, where you just plug directly into the rear at 90 degrees instead of plugging in vertically from underneath, and I'm really proud of myself that that sentence didn't sound dirtier. We get one DisplayPort 1.4 and 2 HDMI 2.1s. That puts it on par with the LG and beats out the HDMI 2.0 ports that Asus used for reasons that I still don't understand. I do want to touch on that real quick because there were some comments on the last video. People thought that you could not get high refresh and 1440p and variable refresh rate to function over HDMI 2.0. That's not the case anymore. PlayStation Update 7 added this back in early March of this year. You get variable refresh rate at native 1440p and it functions fine with HDMI 2.0. This is the AQDM running God of War Ragnarok at 1440p native, 120 FPS with variable refresh rate and HDR. Looks insane. I can't speak to the Xbox Series S, but the Series X offers native 1440 with variable refresh rate support and high refresh at the same time as well. This is Doom Eternal running at 1440, 120 FPS. Most of the Xbox titles run locked at their respective rate, but if you can't get 120 to work in 1440, just go into your video options, disable the use 4K mode, and you should be good to go. The big tangible thing that HDMI 2.1 offers you now is the ability to run a full 240 Hz refresh on your HDMI ports as well as your DisplayPort. On panels that only have HDMI 2.0, you'll get your full 240 on your DisplayPort, but your HDMI ports are going to be capped at 120 FPS at 1440p in Windows. The benefit that you might get later is it could offer you some degree of future-proofing for the next-gen consoles. While we're talking about that, like the other two, this monitor also has FreeSync Premium as its variable refresh rate tech with G-Sync compatibility. There has been some confusion here, but none of the panels that we're talking about today actually use a dedicated G-Sync module. All right, so we do have some expanded USB hub options here as well. We've got 4 USB-A 3.1 ports that are fed by USB-C. Over on the LG and the Asus, we have 2 USB-A ports fed by USB-B. We also get a USB-C input for laptop use, and the other two don't have this. So the Corsair does stand out in having the most advanced I/O and the most impressive USB hub options if you're the type of user that routes a lot of stuff through your monitor. All 3 of these offer headphone jacks, but no speakers, and the LG offers an optical out. Around the front, we have literally nothing around the panel itself. It's the cleanest of the 3 by far. I did think it was a little odd that we didn't get some sort of RGB lighting here, as people really seem to get into all the IQ stuff, and this would make a logical centerpiece for that. Controls are on the underside on the lower right, where we have both power and input select buttons and a 5-way joystick. These also feel a little less robust in terms of quality than the Asus, but they do beat out the frustrating experience of trying not to use the remote with the LG. As for the panel itself, this is gonna break some hearts, but it's a matte coating here as well, just like we've seen on the other two, performs very similar. So for those of you holding out for glossy, sorry. No dice. Because this is the same panel that we've seen on the other two, we're gonna get nearly all the same performance. All the insane contrast, that same like 3-dimensional image, the 1440p that honestly looks more like 4K. We get all the same insanely low gray-to-gray response times that we've been seeing. There's no overdrive modes to balance out here like we'd see on a traditional LCD panel either. Motion blur tests captured on a follow cam appear to be spot on with the other two as well. Again, there's no mode here for backlight strobing or motion blur reduction. Like the previous comparison, it's brightness where we start to to see deviation between these three. My review copy arrived to me with the white point set at 8500 for some reason. It makes the colors look really blue or very cool if you've ever heard anybody say that before, so the first thing I do is a factory reset. Factory fresh, it comes in standard mode with the brightness set to 19%, which gives us a total brightness of only 56 nits. And making any adjustments to the picture mode tells us that we're going to incur additional power usage. So unlike the LG, there's no need to weed through the menus and manually disable a power setting mode. It's going to do it as soon as you move off this mode, which is going to be like everyone, because I can't imagine anyone using this in the default mode. When you set it to gaming, it defaults to standard color mode. So we have a 6260 white point, which is close enough to the 6500 target, and that's going to get us 152 sustained max brightness at 100% white. This is versus 188 on the LG and 252 on the Asus. That's over 21% lower than the LG and 100 full nits or 49% lower than the Asus. Brightness uniformity is an option that doesn't appear on the LG, but it did show up in the Asus, turned on by default. It's here in the Corsair as well, but it's buried deep in the menu system and it's disabled by default. The point of this is to prevent big brightness shifts on screen. Like if you have a small area of full white on your screen, you're going to perceive the overall display to be brighter, and the more full white you get, it's going to dim that display, and it's not by an insignificant amount. When you test this with a small white window against a mostly black background, we can get this panel to go up to 430 nits in this small white area, and the Asus puts up 468 in the same test. When brightness uniformity is active, you get 160 nits on full white and 162 with the black background. The Asus is 252 and 254 respectively. But how big a deal is this setting really in real-world use in gaming? And more specifically, is Corsair shipping this disabled to give users the impression that the panel is brighter than it really is? After all, the Asus has this option, but it ships on by default. The LG doesn't seem to have an option for this at all. It seems like it's hard locked on in the firmware unless I'm missing something. The answer is actually pretty simple. If you're using it as a gaming panel, just leave it turned off. It's a massive difference in brightness, and the shifts in brightness are rarely even noticeable in something as fast-paced as multiplayer. I tried to think of a use case where big shifts in brightness would be really detrimental to the experience, and content creation was the first thing that came to mind, because it's going to be really difficult to color grade video or edit photos if the brightness is jumping around a lot on your monitor. Honestly, I didn't even find it to be a real big issue here. In fact, the only place I could really demonstrate it is in productivity stuff where you're using like Word or Excel and the windows are primarily white. As you resize them, you can see obvious jumps in brightness, but I don't even know if this qualifies as an annoyance, really. There may be some users out there that are more sensitive to stuff like this. If that's you, just look at the Asus, because you're gonna get plenty of brightness without having to worry about any of this. HDR performance feels pretty washed out even after running the Windows 11 HDR calibration app that worked wonders over on the Asus panel. I'm hoping this translates as well to the camera as it does in real life, but it doesn't have quite the same amount of punch here, both in contrast and saturation. When you go into HDR, it locks out the contrast controls on both panels. The Asus ships at 80 for contrast and the Corsair ships at 50. I went back into SDR mode and I balanced those out, but as soon as you go into HDR, it completely resets those. They have their own hard set values. Interestingly, the brightness uniformity mode gets locked out on the Asus. It is still available on the Corsair in HDR mode, but you definitely don't want to use it here. Sadly, this less saturated, less punchy appearance shows up in gaming as well, and for me, it's just a subpar HDR experience. Another interesting note here is that the LG monitor has modes outside of gaming modes that really boost the brightness of the panel up, but it comes at a drastic hit to input lag. So you wouldn't want to use them for gaming, but for productivity, you'll get plenty of brightness with no annoying brightness shifts. For color coverage in SDR mode, we get 99.9% sRGB, which edges out the other two, and 95.5% of DCI-P3, which again leads the pack here. This monitor apparently ships with wide gamut color enabled, which is what you really want for gaming anyway, with no option to turn that off. Like the LG, there is a completely separate sRGB mode, but it yields 94.8% DCI-P3, so it's still wide gamut. This is the same sub-pixel layout here, so you'll have the same text fringing that we've seen before on OLED stuff. We also have the same suite of anti-burn-in features here as well. So there it is. Unfortunately, the Corsair is the worst performing of the three in terms of brightness on a level playing field. It comes in second with uniformity disabled, only because LG currently lacks a way to disable that feature. This could very well be why Corsair feels confident offering an extra year of warranty. In terms of image quality, gray to gray, motion blur, and input lag, it performs on par with the other three. In HDR, it appears virtually identical to the LG, with both being subpar subpar to the Asus. It's only the best at being a USB hub, and it's I/O, which offers a USB-C alongside HDMI 2.1 and its warranty support. If you're content to run with brightness uniformity disabled, or you just don't need your monitor to be that bright to begin with, this Xeneon may fit the bill for you. I can't stress enough just how complicated Asus made this comparison by not including HDMI 2.1 on their monitor. It's a stupid move. That said, I'm going to continue to run the Asus as my main, even though it's my least favorite looking of the three, just for the brightness and the HDR performance, but you may go a different way based on your I/O needs. These are $1,000 monitors, so it's pretty asinine that you have to make any concessions at all at this price point, but it just is what it is if you want 240Hz OLED right now. I truly believe that OLED is the future for gaming displays, but unless you have a fair amount of disposable income, it's probably best to just let this cook for a while. And yes, because of the overwhelming amount of comments about the Alienware 34-inch OLED, I also have a copy of that on the way that we'll look at in a couple weeks. The Stealth Pros have arrived, and I do have a couple more surprises up my sleeve for May, so do stay tuned. If you got any value out of this video today, please consider dropping a like or subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. If you want to talk shop or you need personalized gear recommendations, the best place to do that is in the private Discord. I will link that down in the description. That's it for today. I will catch you all in the next one. Stay up.